Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norm Leahy, a senior editor here at Ballotpedia, and one of our usual features, regular features, the one that I enjoy the most, actually, is office hours, the office hours that we have with our CEO and founder, Leslie Graves. Leslie, thank you for joining us on the ballot.
Yeah, glad to be here this morning.
It's always great to talk to you because I always learn something. And one of the things that you're going to tell us about today, I am extraordinarily interested in learning about. And it's something that's called, let me see if I get this right, a virtual school board listening tour that Ballotpedia conducted. What was it, over the course of a year?
Yeah, over 12 months, we did one-on-one interviews with 100 school board members from 37 different states.
And randomly chosen, I guess. Is that correct?
Well, we didn't choose them. We put out the call. We taught, we got the word out there to school board members, so they opted in. So this listening tour is not going to tell you something that is statistically valid across all 83,000 school board members, but nevertheless, I think it tells us a lot.
Yeah, could you mention that number again? 83,000 school board members nationwide.
Yes, there are a lot of, we all know this, there are 50 state legislatures, but there are 13,500 school districts, each of which elects its own board. So there are 83,000 school board members.
Yeah, I don't think people really have a handle on how many of those elected officials there are in the country. But when you talk to these folks, these 100 school board members, I know you asked them a number of questions. Well, if there was one major takeaway you could have from that discussion, what would it be?
It's that school boards struggle with getting past conflicts that may emerge in the course of doing their business. And many people would think Leslie, when you say conflict, surely you mean the big conflicts that we read about whether they should have closed down during COVID or some of the books in the library. Surely you mean that kind of conflict. But in fact, conflict happens on most school boards most of the time about issues that have nothing to do with that. And it might be as seemingly inconsequential as we need to do a budget cut. So are we going to cancel the French program, or are we going to cancel fifth grade band? Making choices like that. And just like in any kind of a friend relationship or a marriage relationship, some people can get past the conflict and get back to where they wanted to be in that relationship. And some people struggle with that. And that turns out to be true on school boards, which is really interesting.
And just to take one step back, what was the whole genesis of the idea of a listening tour? Where did this come from?
Right. So Ballotpedia, as we do this interview, is 18 years old. And for the first 15 years of our existence, we only covered certain political topics. Statewide ballot measures, state legislators and their elections, U.S. House. So state legislature on up in terms of the kinds of elections and people that we covered. And 3 years ago, we really felt that we needed to get going and be a lot more ambitious than that, and by covering the rest of the people on your ballot. Because it was still the case that if Ballotpedia or other groups did a great job providing information about the state legislative contest that you were involved in or whatever, it was still the case that most people, when they walk into their ballot, they vote, and they get down to where they're like, I have no idea who these people are.
Yeah.
Like none. I've never heard of them. This is the first time I've even seen their names. I have zero idea who these people are. That's extremely common. So we really our big goal is to change that so that if you do the research online, you can find the resource that tells you enough about the people who are running against each other so you can pick the person who corresponds to your values. We're a long way from that.
Well, yeah, because it was one thing you mentioned to me offline about candidates for these local offices, particularly for school boards, who are, what was the term, digitally anonymous?
Digitally invisible, right?
Invisible, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Right. Well, so there are 500,000 local elected officials. So there's these 83,000 school board members. There's about 200,000 city council and town board members, another bunch of people who sit on the county commissions for the country's 3,200 counties. There are a bunch of local elected judges. They're really important. Altogether about 500,000 people. And it turns out that in the last 3 years, as we have started to cover a certain number of down ballot candidates and learn more about it, it would appear that even our very best researchers, for some percentage of those down ballot candidates, they are what we call digitally invisible. And what that means is that they don't put any information about themselves online as far as their candidacy goes. They don't have a campaign page, but they also
Yeah.
don't have a X account. They don't have an Instagram account. They're not on Facebook. They are not talking about their views. They're not presenting themselves as a candidate online. They might have a Facebook page that like the rest of us do, but they don't have a campaign page. So therefore it is literally impossible for us or anybody to figure out what are their top 3 campaign themes, what are they all about, what's the deal with these people. So that's what we're referring to as digitally invisible. We at Ballotpedia, we still have a long way to go and we have a plan. It's about a 3.5-year plan at this point to secure all the information about the candidates that are not digitally invisible, because that's still a big swath of work to get that done. So it's all in one place. Um, but even once we do that, there are still a bunch of them who are digitally invisible.
Well, and I took us down that path because in
Uh,
your discussions with the school board members,
yeah.
I know one of the things that you discussed with them was avenues of communication, not just with each other, but with their constituents. And if you have members of the school board who, like you said, are digitally invisible,
Mhm.
how do they communicate? Is that one of the issues that comes up is how do we communicate with people to let them know what we're doing, what we're about, what our job really is?
Yeah, let me camp out on that a little bit. It's really interesting. So, when you think about adult human beings in this country and any other country, they show up in a family, so they know we can all understand to some extent what it's like to be in a family. They show up at work. We all have some understanding of what it's like to function in a workplace, and so on and so forth. But for these school board members, and this really emerged very quickly in these what turned out to be very intense one-on-one interviews with them, is that we had 25 different employees at Ballotpedia who helped do these interviews. That it felt to most of us as if this is the first time anybody, including a family member, had really tried to find out from them what's it like to be a school board member.
Really?
Yeah, because your school board members are viewed by most of us just without thinking as there's somebody you take for granted. Um, you maybe assume that they ran for school board for their own reasons that may not be
Mhm.
your reasons. They ran, so tough luck for them, whatever they have to deal with. They signed up for it, FAFO, as the kids say these days. But actually all of them really, the great majority of these people had a story to tell. It was very emotional for many of them to
Really?
have us show a deep amount of interest in what their experience is like, which made me think hardly anybody else has ever asked them.
Which is in I've never heard anybody talk about an elected official as having an emotional response to actually somebody talking to them about their job. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, well, the first interview I did, we both started crying. Right.
Really?
We both started crying 45. I don't even remember why at this point, but all of a sudden we both got choked up.
But what's behind it? Is it because they don't know how to talk to people about what's going on, or people just don't care, or is something else?
Well, um, the the function that they have to fill, they got elected, they ran for office, they got elected, and then they have to go sit in on these school board meetings and
Yeah.
deal with all that. That's most of them are functionally volunteers.
Mm.
Of these 83,000 people who sit on these school boards, the very vast majority of them get paid maybe $200 a month. It's a volunteer job,
Mhm.
but it's a busy volunteer job. So they have to go do that. They have to go sit in a school board room and follow the rules and read the agenda. So they have to prepare for the meeting. So even though it's a volunteer job, it's quite time consuming. Plus, they might have to sit in on some subcommittees, the budget or whatever. They have to get to know the district. They have to take calls from the squeaky wheels that live everywhere. There's always squeaky wheels. And then when are they supposed to have time to process their experience?
Mhm.
Never. They
Right.
never get a chance to process their experience. That's what we have learned from this, I would say. And I mean, I don't have any. I'm not saying that's a problem that needs to be solved. I was just really interested to discover that they would like to be able to talk about what this is like for them.
Problems to be solved. I know your aim there wasn't necessarily, like you said, to solve problems, but what problems did school board members bring to you that they think need to be solved?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we really wanted to dig into with them, in addition to how has your board managed conflict in the past, and were you able to move past the conflict? If not, what does that look like? What are the implications of that for how you work together as a team now? One of the other questions was how does your board see itself in terms of the academic achievement levels of the students in your district?
Mhm.
Because everybody thinks that if you have a job as a school board member, it is to improve student outcomes. So there are a lot of different kinds of student outcomes, but a big student outcome obviously is academic achievement. So one of the bigger frustrations, certainly not everybody that we interviewed, but a fair number of them felt like it was very hard to get data to understand what the trends were in academic achievement in their district. Because, by the way, it might be very different for second grade reading than it is for high school biology. So you need to have a lot of data to really understand what the trends are. And then if you're able to get that clear data that contextualizes what your academic achievement numbers are now versus over the last 10 years in your district, you might also want to compare it. Well, how are we doing compared to the other school districts that are demographically similar to ours in our state and country? It's really hard for many school board members to get that information in a way that that they feel like they can move some levers to do something about it.
Which is also astonishing considering, just as parents will know generically, kids seem to be taking tests, standardized tests, all the time to measure their achievement. Who gets those results if they're not going to the school board?
Well, they do the, trend toward, ubiquitous standardized testing really started during the George W. Bush administration,
Mhm.
and then it accelerated actually during the Obama administration, and this was the Federal Department of Education requesting they can't force a school district to do something, but they can attach dollar strings to it, which made it financially beneficial to districts to engage in ubiquitous standardized testing. And then the state government, some of them also did it, but, there are different standardized tests, different states have different ways of thinking about it. So even though there's a lot of measurement and a lot of tests, it's still hard to interpret what does that mean for us and what if that's what the trend is, if our percentage of second graders who can read at grade level has declined by 22% over the last 5 years. What are we supposed to do about that? That is another question that is a struggle. You can see why. It's not like you're supposed to know the answer to that if you're the school board member. And by the way, you could say, well, that's the superintendent's job. That's why we hire them. They're supposed to know all that. But it isn't necessarily the case, Norm, that anybody knows the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm I mean, it's a hard problem. This is one reason why in the last 5 years, there's been an explosion of interest in public school education alternatives, and,
Mhm.
I've talked about that because of the 17 or 18 states that now have universal school choice, so you're gonna have some students leaving the public school district and so forth.
Mhm.
But even with all of that, you're still m you're I would anticipate that in the next 5 to 10 years, you will still have 70 to 80% of the children in a school district will still be going to the public schools.
Right. Right. And which seemed to be from an outsider, and even for people on the inside, a black box. Things happen, and We don't know how the outputs arrive, but there it is. But if you so you compile all of these interviews, and you're able to draw some broad conclusions. One about
Mhm.
conflict. What are a couple of the other big ones that you were able to draw out of these interviews?
Yeah, well, one we divided people up at these school boards that we interviewed. We could see that there were 3 categories. That there
Mhm.
were school boards that were engaged and able to move past conflict. Then there are school boards that are stuck in conflict. And then there's another about 30% of them where and people who have been married for a long time might recognize that their marriage might have gone through a period like this, where you're just like, you just gave up on the other person. That's you still load
It
the
happens.
dishwasher and all that, but you're like, that's not an uncommon event to occur in long-term marriages. And that some of significant percentage of a certain percentage of school board members are what we call detached and passive, where they're like,
Hmm.
there's nothing
Okay.
I can do. I've nothing
Interesting.
I can do with these people.
Wow. And yet they continue to serve.
Yes, because, I mean, you always hope that this is transient and that maybe next year things will be better. But it's interesting because when you get married, you've married that person, you chose that person. If you're on a school board, you didn't. It's the voters that chose them, and then you have to figure out whether you can deal with that person. By the way, the most important thing here is that all of this is completely divorced from what the political ideology is of those people that
Okay.
get elected. It is
Right.
not it certainly political ideology does matter. You will get people elected who will have different views on police officers in the high schools and the things that are more ideologically framed. But even with that, the, conflict styles are not related to people's political ideology. It seems to me to be more rooted in, whether most of the people on the school board are what I call flexible pragmatists or not, or just don't have the skill set to move past conflict.
Okay. Now, this report is going to be released when
I
specifically?
I think no, I believe it'll be, released the first week after, Labor Day.
Okay. And
Mhm.
we'll, of course, do a push on that. You'll be able to
Mhm.
read the full report on Ballotpedia. And let me ask you this. Do you plan to do a follow-up?
We're not sure whether we would wanna do, more another virtual school board listening tour. Part of our, desire and incentive in doing this was that we wanted our staffers, our writers and researchers to become more deeply familiar with what it's like to be a school board member,
Mhm.
because they will be covering their school board elections. So, this was a way to achieve that, and that won 100%. That totally knocked it out of the park on that. So, I wonder, though, whether we haven't decided. We might wanna do a virtual listening tour for city council members or for county commissioners and find out more about what their life is like in the trenches. By the way, Norm, one of the important things here is that, uh like I said, there are 500,000 of these local elected officials compared
Right.
to 10,000 if you take state legislature on up to president. There's only 10,000 of those people. It seems to us, our theory is that the character and personality and, value of the 500,000, if you knew them, if everybody knew what they were doing, understood it, would be much more positive. It would give people a more positive view of our American democracy. Then you might have, if you just look at the state legislature on up, where it's all, the war of all against all at all times. I get it. I understand why it's that way, but
Sure.
it's really not that way that we can tell. It's people struggling to solve the problems of their neighbors and their neighbors' kids as
Right.
best as they can.
Yes, because removed from the bright lights on the 24-hour news cycle, there are people who are just trying to make it work.
Right.
And that was, I think, one of the big things that we'll draw from this report. Leslie, I know there's a lot on your plate, and I appreciate very much you giving us an overview of the virtual school board listening tour. And we'll probably end up talking about it again because I suspect that the results that you draw from it might show up in our coverage over the next year or so. But thank
Well,
you for
I
joining us.
think so. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all works out. It was
Right?
great to talk to
Because
you this morning.
yeah, because remember, folks, it's okay to cover politics. It helps you cover them better if you have a little bit of empathy for your subject. It really does. And on that note, I thank you for joining us today here on The Ballot. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can even watch us on YouTube. I'm Norm Leahy, and until next time, I will see you on the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.